This is one of those stories you never forget.
Terror and carnage on Israel's streets.
And here is how it all started.
Israel and Gaza are at war after an unprecedented attack this morning.
The impossible mission carried out by a gang of Hamas rebels against arguably the most heavily guarded country on the planet. And against all odds, they succeeded. Ever since then, everybody has been watching what's been going on, including you and me. Learning more about US foreign policy, the Zionist takeover of American politics, and the dark origins of the apartheid Israeli state. And as things became clearer, we went deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. Yet there's still more that's being hidden from us, and we have no idea. In the darkest moments for the people of Palestine, where it seemed every Muslim country betrayed their cause, this man stood as a beacon of light in the chaos. His voice roared in the walls of Masjid al-Aqsa, keeping their hearts alive, and he quickly rose to the most wanted list of multiple surrounding countries. With this life-threatening order put against him, he was forced to carry his vision for the future of the Muslim Ummah and the liberation of Palestine under cover, faking his identity with 11 different aliases and multiple different passports. This malicious witch hunt became a primary objective of colonial powers, despite this figure of liberation being a staunch opponent of violence and calling for peace and unity. This figure was the grandson of the world-renowned Ottoman scholar Yusuf al-Nabhani. His name was Muhammad Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani. The closest attempts at liberating Palestine would be carried out by him and his group. And even greater than that, this may have been the closest that the Muslim Ummah had been to establishing the Caliphate ever since its fall. This story is one of the most intense and heartbreaking stories of modern Islamic history, attracting support as well as controversy. The story of one of the most influential thinkers of the Muslim Ummah, who began a movement that has endured more attacks and labels than any other non-violent Islamic movement, and are in a tough battle against the right-wing Zionist UK authorities. Yet, against impossible odds, they still stand today, operating in over 40 different Muslim countries and almost every Western country today. This is the story of Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani and his Islamic revivalist movement, Hizb ut-Tahrir. Born in the village of Ijzim in the Haifa district of Palestine, sometime between 1909 and 1911, both his parents were scholars. His maternal grandfather, Yusuf al-Nabhani, is argued as one of the greatest scholars of his era, and Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani was very close to him. After completing his memorization of the Quran at a young age, sometime between 7 to 10 years old, he would accompany his grandfather, learning a great deal of knowledge from him, both Islamically and politically as well, due to his connections with the Ottoman politicians. It was only due to his grandfather's advice and financial backing that Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani was able to study as a full-time student in 2 universities simultaneously, Darul Uloom and Al-Azhar University with their new education system, and also under many other scholars that his grandfather had recommended him to in Egypt. Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani completed his studies and left Egypt permanently, returning to Palestine with 4 certificates. The first was the Al-Azhar High School certificate. The second was a certificate equivalent to a degree in Sharia from Al-Azhar. The third was a Darul Uloom degree in Arabic language and literature. And the fourth, which was also the most important, was the Ijaza from the Higher Institute for Islamic Jurisprudence, which would allow him to apply and become a judge in many parts of Palestine. Up until now, the young sheikh had observed the unprecedented upheaval of the Muslim world, the 1917 British takeover of Palestine, the 1923 British Mandate for Palestine being passed by the League of Nations, the 1929 conflict between Palestinian and the Jewish settlers. Not to mention one of the biggest blows the Ummah had ever faced in 1924, the official eradication of the Ottoman Caliphate, replaced by the new Turkish Republic. even though the abolition was practically done in 1909 after the coup against Sultan Abdul Hamid al-Thani. This was a formal end to the political entity that is considered by Muslims to be the bedrock of Islam as we know it. A communal obligation of such heavy weight that many classical scholars would label it as a crown of all obligations, or even the mother of all obligations, indicating that the rest of the deen cannot stand firmly without it, and that every Muslim must see it as an urgent matter to solve. Otherwise, they would see colonial powers rip away at their lives on a mass scale, something we Muslims in the 21st century are well acquainted with by now. A shield that kept the Muslim Ummah united and stood for 1300 years has fallen for the first time in 1924, and a new era of colonization and massacres is introduced. Knowing the sheer weight of this event forced the Al-Azhar scholars to have a council meeting, after which they issued a statement stating that Khilafah was the leadership of the deen and worldly affairs, and it was the Prophet's representative in terms of protecting the deen and implementation of its laws. However, these scholars of Al-Azhar weren't the only ones chanting for the re-establishment of the Caliphate and announcing its obligation upon the Muslims. Similar conferences emanated from Mecca and Cairo, aiming to elect a new caliph. However, all attempts had ended in failure due to the sheer power and wit of the opposing forces against the Muslims. This was the atmosphere in which Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani entered as a student, and he immediately made an impression like no other. His colleague Sheikh Subhi al-Mu'aqqad stated that al-Nabhani caught the attention of students and teachers for his depth of thinking and strength in argumentation. His approach was well known to be different, digressing from the usual method of rote learning and blind imitation that many others used to practice to get good scores and not get on anyone's bad side by keeping their opinions to themselves. Al-Nabhani always read opposing views and evaluated conclusions for himself, showing an early propensity for Ijtihad, which is the difficult process of extracting Islamic rulings to apply to the current reality. Just so you know, some madhab, such as the Maliki madhab, haven't had someone capable of Ijtihad for centuries. That's how difficult this task is. Al-Nabhani would also meet with the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, during his time in Egypt, sometimes even staying over at his house to sleep, though he would never officially join the Muslim Brotherhood. It was these connections at Al-Azhar and the Muslim Brotherhood and in Egypt at large that would help al-Nabhani in his formation of a political party later in life. He would return to Palestine as an Islamic teacher at various schools before getting accepted to become an assistant judge in the court of Haifa in 1940. In 1945, he was transferred to work in Jerusalem for 40 days before being transferred to Al-Ramla. The constant transfers from court to court were allegedly due to his fairness towards the people and not being pressured by the elites, whether for political or financial reasons. Other judges and politicians would dispute over his verdict, but the people would always be pleased with him, to the extent that his son would recollect going to Eid prayer with his father to find him constantly withdrawing his hand away from the people who were attempting to kiss it, which is a sign of great respect in Arab society. For the following years, Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani would meet with many seniors from different movements and organizations, learning from their mistakes and having lengthy discussions regarding the revival of the Muslim Ummah. This investigation for the diagnosis of the Ummah came to an absolute halt in 1947 when there was an outbreak of hostilities between the Palestinians and the new Jewish settlers. With the shortage of weapons due to British confiscation, Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani traveled to Syria requesting financial and military aid. He would go on to do the same in Egypt, returning to Palestine with one single thing: a conclusion that the Arab rulers have betrayed the Palestinian cause. The empty hands of his were a testament to it. He continued doing his best as the fighting intensified, and by July 1948, the entire population of his village in Ijzim was expelled by Jewish forces. Al-Ramla and Lidda fell in the same month, making Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani and his family official refugees. He traveled through Syria to Beirut, where he previously left his wife and children in an apartment with his in-laws. He sat here now. The shock of such a crushing defeat, the displacements from home, and the betrayal of the Arab rulers, it all caused intense agitation not only in the mind of al-Nabhani, but many Palestinians as well. The question of how, why, what can we do, led al-Nabhani and others to form bulletproof responses, a deeply studied diagnosis of the crisis in Palestine. And it was this diagnosis of the Palestinian crisis that would lead him to his greatest decision: forming a political party. His scholarly roots thanks to his grandfather, his unmatched genius according to his peers at Al-Azhar, the love his people had for him according to his son, and the realization that the Arab leaders have betrayed the Ummah thanks to his experience, all put him in a position like no other. If anyone's going to do it, it's him. Thinking that surely things could not get worse, you would stand to see over 700,000 more Palestinians displaced. The entire map of Palestine would be redrawn with the establishment of the ethnocentric apartheid state of Israel. How could anyone bear to see this happen to their own people? Al-Nabhani could not stay in Beirut any longer. He returned to Palestine the same year he left, 1948. He entered Palestine through an offer to become a judge given by his friend Anwar al-Khatib. He worked 2 years as a judge, then running for parliament unsuccessfully. He went on to become a lecturer at the Islamic College in Amman for another 2 years before he stopped everything to dedicate his full time to politics. After it had become absolutely clear to everyone that the Arab-Israeli war after the Nakba was a big show put on by the power-hungry Arab leaders to feign support for Palestine, the discussions about how to liberate Palestine and return the dignity of the Arabs was a commonplace discussion. These emotions led al-Nabhani to respond to the call of the military governor of Jerusalem, Abdullah al-Tal, who was secretly organizing a coup d'etat against the Jordanian monarch, King Abdullah. The two of them spoke of uniting the Arabs by ridding the Hashemite monarch of Jordan that was selling Palestine for a penny and a dime. Though al-Tal's plans were foiled and he was expelled from Jerusalem, al-Nabhani was not found in direct involvement. There are many reports and testimonies as to his motivations and extent of involvement with al-Tal, but none of it is really conclusive. However, one thing is for sure. This event gave al-Nabhani live experience on power dynamics within local politics and how regime changes work. Following this event, Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani gave fiery speeches in Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem and many other large mosques. His content was primarily focused on Western imperialism and exposing the role of Arab rulers in surrendering Palestine and allowing colonial influence in the region. As this young man went masjid to masjid, city to city, giving khutbahs, halaqas and announcements, calling out politicians, scholars and rulers that have betrayed the Palestinian cause and betrayed the Muslim Ummah as a whole, he was met with an unexpected invitation. After a speech given in Nablus, he was summoned before the Jordanian King Abdullah. The monarch praised the grandfather of Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani, hoping to win him over. But as he extended his request to give him allegiance, al-Nabhani replied, "I have already pledged allegiance to Allah to be the ally of His and His messenger's allies, and the enemy of His and His messenger's enemies." This was taken as affront to the king, and al-Nabhani was jailed for a short period of time. This was al-Nabhani's first real experience with imprisonment for speaking the truth. Al-Nabhani wrote 3 books indicating a progression in his thinking between 1950 and 1951. First was Untold Palestine. He noted that the loss of Palestine is the worst event to have happened to the Arabs in modern history, even more than the fall of the Caliphate. In this first work of his are hints of nationalism or Arabism. His second book, Risalat al-Arab, which was a lecture al-Nabhani was invited to deliver to the Culture Committee of the Arab League in August of 1950, however, government authorities prevented him from traveling, forcing him to write the lecture and have someone else deliver it for him. This written lecture was a call for the Arab League to adopt Islam as the message of the Arabs and to overhaul the Western manufactured education system that was actively colonizing the minds of the Arabs. In 1951 was a short article called Nizam al-Islami, which argued the Arab language is of utmost priority for critical thinking and revival. That Islamic politics and revival is from Islamic thought, and Islamic thoughts cannot be conceived appropriately without understanding the Arabic language. His ideas quickly began to take a clearer position towards revival, where the previous muddling into Arabism or nationalism and focus on Palestine as the issue that needed to be resolved, now becoming an ummatic issue, and that all Muslim lands suffered from the same disease, which is the absence of divine law or Sharia. Even al-Nabhani acknowledges his naivety in his early writings when he found his son with a copy of his first book, Untold Palestine, and told him to throw it all in the garbage rather than read it. One prominent wave boosting Hizb ut-Tahrir was the decay of the Muslim Brotherhood, resulting in a transfer of members. One of the lead figures of Brotherhood, Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Khayyat, had tried to solve many issues in the movement, such as lackadaisical standards for membership, leading to low-quality members in their thinking, the lack of clarity in methodology, leaving a void in Islamic knowledge after the assassination of the founder, Hassan al-Banna, and many more. Al-Khayyat raised these issues with the Jordanian leadership of the Brotherhood, but failed. He then tried taking it to the headquarters in Egypt, and once again failed to resolve these issues. Simultaneously, his interactions with al-Nabhani were impressing him further and further. Between the years 1949 and 1951, he would consistently have al-Nabhani speak at Brotherhood centers in Palestine, leading to rumors that al-Nabhani was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Other rumors even claimed that al-Nabhani rejected an offer of regional leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood. However, al-Khayyat explicitly denied any membership of al-Nabhani, and that he was the one organizing positions where al-Nabhani gets to share his ideas and thoughts at Brotherhood centers. He did this because he believed al-Nabhani's ideas were much clearer and thought out than those of the Muslim Brotherhood at the time, due to his expertise in fiqh with clear political thoughts, along with a clear methodology laid out on how to achieve these goals. The scholarly background of al-Nabhani was also something that al-Khayyat felt was severely missing from the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Khayyat soon attempted to unify the Muslim Brotherhood under al-Nabhani by having conversations with the leadership of the movement, but these efforts ultimately failed. Al-Khayyat blamed the failures of his communication on al-Banna's son-in-law, Sa'id Ramadan, who apparently began waging a public campaign against al-Nabhani at the time. Troubled with such a reaction, al-Khayyat left the Brotherhood and joined the early forming of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which still wasn't an official political party. He justified leaving the Brotherhood and joining Hizb ut-Tahrir in writing, explaining a combination of 4 aspects that led him to such a decision. Firstly, the call clearly focused on restarting the Islamic way of life, instead of complacency under Western ideologies. Secondly, it adopted Islamic concepts and understandings instead of secular and nationalistic ones like the Brotherhood had. Thirdly, the party was concerned with political awareness built from an Islamic basis instead of political naivety that the Muslim Brotherhood struggled from. And fourthly, it did not allow individual members to hold contradictory opinions, leading to disunity or lack of clarity. However, there was a clear structure in Hizb ut-Tahrir. Al-Khayyat claimed that the Brotherhood campaigned against him and slandered him, even accusing him of being a Freemason, and it was these reasons a conflict arose between the two movements, despite the positive interactions between the founders, al-Banna and al-Nabhani, in the past. This conflict only grew as more and more senior members of the Brotherhood in the Asham area were leaving, particularly the scholarly graduates from Al-Azhar, such as Al-Da'ur and Abdul Qadim Zalloum. This continued until the one-way transfer of members was even noted by the British embassy that was monitoring the area, who stated, "Al-Nabhani's theories have attracted many of the Ikhwanis to his party. However, they always remained a minority proportion of the Hizb." After the betrayal of the Arab leaders in 1948, many small groups began forming and organizing to strategize their own liberation. It is these ragtag groups of people that would begin joining the unofficial Hizb in droves. A group led by Hamza Tahbub, known as 313, responded to Hizb ut-Tahrir's call after many conversations and began being referred to as Nabhaniyun. In Irbid, Qadri al-Nablusi had a team of 30 to 40 teenagers preparing to fight to liberate Palestine that all joined Hizb ut-Tahrir after a few discussions, except for a singular member. In Amman, where al-Nabhani continued his teaching job, many locals and members of the military used to attend his daily 10 a.m. lecture, and their consistency of attendance had them labeled Jama'a al-Nabhani. These lectures were well known to be discussing issues around the need for a caliphate. Whilst many people invested in his call as it became more public and concise, there were many that turned away from his call because he progressed beyond merely talking about the liberation of Palestine. He was now talking about the Muslim Ummah as a whole. Early colleagues and scholars that were supportive found his goals to be too ambitious all of a sudden and too unrealistic, sometimes even claiming that he was dreaming or that he had gone mad. However, this did not stop him, and on the 14th of March 1953, Hizb ut-Tahrir announced its establishment in the newsletter Al-Sarih. This led to an immediate reaction from the Deputy Interior Minister, Ali Hassana, who organized for the arrest of all founding members of the party, so they were all detained except for al-Nabulsi. Many free members began their attempt at saving the detained by gathering signatures of 37 prominent figures in the justice sector calling for the release of those arrested. The letter was published in the newspaper Al-Difa and led to the release of the founding members, but al-Nabhani and Hamdan were on house arrest, not allowed to leave Jerusalem. This was only 18 days before Nabhani was returned to Amman to work. Unlike the Muslim Brotherhood, which applied and was recognized immediately, Hizb ut-Tahrir was repressed severely right from the start. However, al-Nabhani refused to compromise with the state and insisted on pushing his revolutionary ideas irrespective of the official reaction. And because of this bravery, the strength of their ideas were beginning to show. In Amman, activists described how every household knew someone who was studying with the party. Daily talks in the mosques of Amman had fiery language, openly attacking the British general Glub Pasha by name. This brazen rhetoric attracted many people, including socialists and Christians, that would sit and listen to the speeches from outside of the mosque, impressed with the anti-imperial stances taken by Hizb ut-Tahrir. Their activities quickly grew across Palestine in the cities of Amman, Jerusalem, Hebron, Jenin, Tulkarem, Irbid, Ramallah, and Khalqiyah, among many others. And a year later, the impact of Hizb ut-Tahrir grew exponentially, with al-Nabhani personally visiting Lebanon, where a number of members had formally joined and began activities. Many members also traveled to Kuwait for work, leading to a natural presence of Hizb ut-Tahrir there as well, including Kuwaiti journals announcing the establishment of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Jordan. There were some areas that al-Nabhani deliberately sent members to grow the da'wah, such as Iraq. One of the biggest personalities to be won over in Iraq was Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Badri, a young and charismatic scholar born in 1932. After hearing their ideas, he, along with two others, traveled to meet al-Nabhani personally and discuss ideas further. After a successful meeting, they joined the party, and al-Badri soon became one of the leaders of the party, along with Hussein Ahmad al-Saleh and 6 others. The first year after the establishment of the party turned a huge success, but along with this success was evil quickly following suit. Governments became aware of Hizb ut-Tahrir's message and impact, and al-Nabhani received news that the authorities were going to raid his house in Amman and arrest him. He responded swiftly and left the capital and Jordan as a whole, traveling to Syria, then to Lebanon where his family resided. But before we further discuss the events that the party experienced, let's understand why they gained so much popularity despite the harsh crackdowns right from the start. We must first understand the Ijtihad, or diagnosis, of al-Nabhani. After the fall of the Caliphate, everyone was looking for answers on how to respond. The first thing anyone would turn towards is the Quran and Sunnah, as understood by the classical scholars. The problem is, no classical scholar ever wrote a book on how to establish the Caliphate, because it was something that could have never even been imagined. The closest thing that we can find is Ghiyath al-Umam wa Tiyath al-Dhulam by Imam al-Juwayni, who, perhaps due to the threat of crusaders, imagined a dystopian world where Muslim unity would be destroyed. Even this book is no clear-cut blueprint on the actions needed to establish Islam. So, what do we do? Where do we turn to? How do we respond? It is in this moment of confusion that some scholars began proposing that the answer has been under our noses all along. That the entire life of the final messenger ﷺ, sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was a literal blueprint in and of itself. That the Prophet ﷺ began in a dystopian society where the Arabs had no unity and governed themselves over man-made ideologies. And the Prophet ﷺ was able to change their fate in a matter of 13 years when he manufactured a coup d'etat in Medina to overthrow the cabinet and regime of a man known as Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, taking leadership in his place thanks to the consent of the people. Now, this was a slap in the face for many Islamic revivalist movements such as the Muslim Brotherhood, among others, who posited that the establishment of an Islamic state is only a byproduct of individual and cultural reformation of the Muslim masses. This is why many prominent members of the Brotherhood would leave the movement to join Hizb ut-Tahrir. The analysis of the Muslim Brotherhood was simply un-Islamic. In fact, there were some dark Western origins in their thought. The proposition of Hizb ut-Tahrir and many other skeptics of the Brotherhood put forward that Islam cannot attain authority in a country under the influence of the West through elections, meaning that the state would prevent its own apparatus from being used to bring about its own downfall. Therefore, participations in elections was to be used simply as a way to disseminate ideas. The only way to achieve radical change required would be to spread the idea to the masses until there is mass support, leading to a revolution carried out by the masses or through a coup d'etat by the military. enforcing the will of the people against the old established order. Fixing the hearts and minds of the Muslim masses was now understood as something that comes after the establishment of the Islamic State. Therefore, the priority is not to give lectures and events to simply raise the Islamic knowledge of the average Muslim, though that would be a virtuous initiative. The priority was to organize a non-violent coup that would replace an un-Islamic regime with an Islamic one that applied the divine laws of Allah instead of man-made laws that were applied throughout the Muslim world. The Hizb considered that it was the absence of the Caliphate that was the root physical issue, and that if left unaddressed, it would lead to the perpetuation of other problems, and that the intellectual repression of the Ummah was a true legacy of the colonial occupation in their view, and its liberation could only come about by adopting an authentic ideology as derived from Islamic sources, which would lead to the implementation of an authentic form of government over Muslims, which is, again, the Khilafah. This academic approach, combined with the party activism that rejects the legitimacy of any regimes in the Middle East, is one of the most prominent characteristics of Hizb ut-Tahrir. And though it has been considered a security threat from the moment of its inception, it remains a non-violent movement. Their conception of organizing coups is through winning over the military and officers so that the monarch or ruler has no option but to step down and transfer authority. Public opinion doesn't allow them to stand there any longer. But all it takes is for one autonomous state to gather public opinion favoring ruling by Islam, and the Caliphate will burst into fruition, sparking revival like never before. The intellectual revolution, which was sought by Hizb ut-Tahrir's Ijtihad or blueprint, prevented al-Nabhani from accepting offers of power during that first decade of establishment, with the Hizb claiming to have had offers of support from members of the military establishment in Jordan in 1953, 1957, 1961, and 1963, meaning that the regime was willing to organize a coup to overthrow the Hashemite monarchy of Jordan and put al-Nabhani as the sole ruler that would rule by the Quran and Sunnah. Despite such offers, al-Nabhani rejected them since he felt that the society in Jordan had not embraced the Hizb. In other words, because he considered that the people were not ready to award sole legitimacy to the Sharia, though they may have consented to the rule of al-Nabhani. Given the lack of success of future attempts, this may have been an overly optimistic reading of what such offers could have brought to the table. With the party now officially announced, al-Nabhani chose Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, for his center of personal activity, whilst keeping Palestine and Jordan, countries where the party was officially operating from. Activity was flourishing without his physical presence there, to the point that the founder of the National Socialist Party in Jordan wrote, "This party spread in Jordan like wildfire through straw. This party displayed astonishing activity, and its pamphlets were always found in people's hands." Former Hamas spokesman Ibrahim Josha recalls how majority of the students in their groups were with Hizb ut-Tahrir, and only one or two with the Muslim Brotherhood. He said this may have been because Hizb ut-Tahrir won over the teachers and thinkers of society. Other statements label Hizb ut-Tahrir as the strongest political group among students in Jerusalem until 1955. However, much of this interaction still had to be kept underground due to government crackdowns. The reasons as to why the group was growing so rapidly despite such severe restrictions has been analyzed by the likes of Ziad Salama and Shafiq, who stated that the idea of liberation of Palestine being reliant on the creation of an Islamic state first fit in line with the trauma and feelings of betrayal that emerged from the Nakba. By the end of 1954, Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani released a booklet explaining how the party had moved from its initial stages of culturing and educating into what he termed Nuqta al-Intilaq, a stage where members are now interacting with wider society on a more public manner, slowly crawling out from the undergrounds that they were accustomed to. To solidify this phase, the founder and senior members of the party ran for parliament. After 6 independent members ran for parliament, only al-Daura had won his districts. Members and sources clearly stated that the electoral fraud was brazen, including Glub Pasha himself, the one responsible for leading the Transjordan Arab League that was representing British authority in the Middle East. Despite this failure of infiltrating the parliament, mass support was cheering their cause, until it wasn't. A series of problems derailed the public support of Hizb ut-Tahrir. First off, calling all the regimes in the Middle East as illegitimate immediately resulted in security crackdowns with mass arrests happening in Syria and Iraq in 1955. Secondly, their rejection of nationalism and Arabism had many earlier supporters begin to accuse them of being traitors to the Palestinian cause, because the Hizb began criticizing all of the nationalistic movements that were supporting Palestine. They accused organizations such as the Palestinian Liberation Organization as being inherently a traitorous organization, which was being used as a tool to bring about recognition of the Israeli state in the region. And that throughout the history of Palestine, the British had never been able to achieve its plans without the complicity of some of the natives. In its literature, the Hizb classed the issue of Palestine as an Islamic rather than an Arab issue, that it was a confrontation between the Muslims and the West rather than the Arabs and the West. Israel is seen as having been established and supported by external states, and so the true enemy was the British and Americans, and that Israel was merely a bridgehead used by others to maintain control and influence within the Arab lands. The solving of the Palestinian problem by the removal of Israel from its roots through a jihad to save Palestine could only be achieved through the establishment of a Khilafah or Caliphate. This is also summarized in the infamous quote by al-Nabhani that is now adopted by Muslims across the world today. Israel is a shadow of the Arab regimes. When an object ceases to exist, its shadow ceases to exist. Thirdly, the rising nationalism throughout the Arab world was unprecedented. The new ruler of Egypt, Jamal Abdel Nasser, took over the crucial trade choke point known as the Suez Canal from British and French control. Though he was to face military retaliation, the Soviet Union left the imperial powers drained, unable to take back the Suez Canal. This was the first time the Middle East had ever seen the colonial powers lose so miserably. This sent a wave of confidence throughout the Arab world, who are now championing Jamal Abdel Nasser as the hero who saved them from the colonial powers. He was quickly becoming the symbol of Arab unity, despite his entirely secular worldview. Yet, Hizb ut-Tahrir seemed to be attempting to tear down this symbol of hope by publishing pamphlets labeling him an American agent. This was not taken well by the Arab masses, and they quickly turned the tables on Hizb ut-Tahrir. These three reasons, calling all regimes in the Middle East as illegitimate, criticizing nationalistic liberation movements as aiding the colonial agenda, and criticizing the rising hope of the Arab world, Jamal Abdel Nasser, all created a wave of opposition towards Hizb ut-Tahrir that they had never experienced before. And it was this wave of oppression that created the perfect breeding grounds for a CIA initiative to destroy the growing revivalist movement. In 1956, a rumor was planted that al-Nabhani had received a check for $150,000, and this was verified only by US sources. The news was widely propagated in newspapers and on radios across Jordan and Lebanon, and the rumor that al-Nabhani was a US agent began to spread. This rumor fit the puzzle perfectly for the Arabs that saw how Hizb ut-Tahrir was always against Jamal Abdel Nasser since its origins, as one symbolized Arab unity, the other symbolized disunity and betrayal. And between this intense atmosphere for Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani was the disagreement arising from two other executive figures of Hizb ut-Tahrir, Dawood Hamdan and Nimr al-Masri. Both of them retaliated on how the party should conclude operations. The two argued that the majority conclusion should be binding on the leader, whilst al-Nabhani argued that this is a matter of Islamic jurisprudence and that the leader should have the final say on the matter. These tensions led to the expulsion of both executives from the party. Al-Nabhani already was known amongst members for his strictness in interdisciplinary matters, and this event further exacerbated that view. This fallout had far-reaching consequences. Khalid al-Hassan, who was a close friend of Nimr al-Masri, also left the Hizb and established the Palestinian Liberation Organization named Fatah along with Yasser Arafat. There are many other accounts of members leaving alongside al-Masri, and one other member leaving alongside Dawood Hamdan. Al-Nabhani replaced the two with al-Daur and Zalloum and tried rebuilding the Syrian wing of Hizb ut-Tahrir, but arrests and expulsions prevented large numbers from entering the party at the time. Instead, rumors of al-Nabhani's strictness and hot-headed temper swayed other members such as al-Kilani and Makki to leave the party in 1959. But members such as al-Tamimi and al-Khayyat were still heavily involved, giving speeches to thousands of people at a time around the obligation to rule by Islam. And when he thought things couldn't get any worse, Al-Nabhani was in Beirut at the time and was arrested for inciting sectarianism. Despite the struggles and intense opposition, Al-Nabhani was more optimistic than ever, concluding that all of this was progress. After he was bailed out 3 months later, he published a book called Dakhal al-Mujtama, stating that Hizb ut-Tahrir successfully addressed society and was at the point of imposing itself as a political force within it. The 1958 unification of Egypt and Syria sent yet another wave of support for Jamal Abdel Nasser, and a new age of Arab unity had begun. The Hashemite monarchies of Iraq and Jordan responded to the pressure by creating their own alliance called the Arab Union, which was short-lived due to the coup that overthrew King Faisal II of Iraq on the 14th of July 1958. The lead of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Iraq, Abdul Aziz al-Badri, gave a public speech on the radio supporting the Free Officers' actions, resulting in al-Nabhani temporarily suspending him from the party. Now, al-Badri was a young scholar, nearly 2 decades younger than al-Nabhani. He showed unwavering courage in airtight arguments. His popularity amongst the people was growing so rapidly, according to his biographer Muhammad al-Alisi, al-Badri had far outgrown the party itself and did not return to the party after his suspension, leaving many confused to his stance about them. Al-Badri remained a critic of the un-Islamic regimes and continued his call for a Khilafah in Iraq. However, after the Ba'athist Party organized a coup in 1968, that succeeded and proceeded to consolidate their success by removing any and all opposition. Abdul Aziz al-Badri was far too popular and respected to just be caught out. But after months of trying to silence him, the Ba'athist Party just had enough. In 1969, they abducted the scholar and tortured him in prison. Around 11 days later, his body was found with visible signs of severe torture, including cut-off fingers and a cut-off tongue. The political atmosphere was suffocating around the turn of the 60s, with America using Jamal Abdel Nasser to destroy British influence in the region and consolidate power for themselves. Most of the Arab world championed Nasser as the hope of the Arab, whilst al-Nabhani firmly pushed back, stating that he was a US agent and the formation of the UAR was just another US ploy against the British-backed Hashemite monarchies of Iraq and Jordan. Though it may have sounded crazy to the average person back then, we know now that al-Nabhani was spot on due to Miles Copeland blowing the whistle with his book Game of Nations. It was this depth of political analysis al-Nabhani had acquired that the leaving of al-Khayyat and al-Badri from the party were just minor variables in the progress of the party. He would continue distributing pamphlets against Nasser and calling out the nationalist belief that was growing in the Muslim population. The main bases of the activists in Jordan and Lebanon commonly found their party members physically attacked whilst distributing leaflets. There was vehement rejection by the public that Nasser was an agent for any foreign power, much less America. Instead, the accusers were labeled agents instead, obstacles standing in the way of Arab liberation. Despite this harsh opposition, al-Nabhani was even more stringent on the leaflets being overtly political, clearly attacking various rulers along with the dominant proclaimed ideologies of Arabism and democracy. Some members believed al-Nabhani was asking too much of them with his orders to give speeches and distribute leaflets in this threatening atmosphere, leading to their ostracization. Al-Nabhani, however, considered this to be a test of their conviction, a necessary obstacle of how the call had to be carried out. That compromising for the sake of public opinion would mean that Hizb ut-Tahrir had compromised its own ideology. He considered it imperative for the members to adhere to the ideology alone, even if it garnered the entire Ummah's resentment, which would be temporary in his view because the Ummah would wake up after seeing such a display and thinking for themselves, and so the party continued until they couldn't. By the end of 1958, around 97% of party members had left, a crushing reality. It's not that they didn't believe in the ideas or that they didn't love al-Nabhani, it's just that they could not continue any longer with such pressure. In Jordan, just stating that you are a member of the party can land you 2 years in jail minimum. If you were silent, you were forced to write a formal rejection of the party. Some even advised al-Nabhani before leaving that criticizing Nasser was self-defeating. They felt they were the ones losing out with such stern commands that it was like hitting their heads against a wall, resulting in broken heads while the wall remained standing strong. In 1959, police came to arrest al-Nabhani whilst he was staying in an apartment in Tripoli, the capital of Libya, with Abdul Qadim Zalloum. Both of them were warned that the police were making their way, and so both of them fled to Beirut, the capital of Lebanon. They were told that the ones who informed the police were their neighbors, whom after seeing them dressed in scholarly attire, began spying on the pair. After this event, Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani decided to shave off his beard and discard his scholarly attire permanently for security reasons. He knew now that he must go into hiding. Al-Nabhani entered into Beirut under a completely separate identity. He had an alias with a professionally crafted passport to match it. He rented an apartment with Zalloum and they remained in complete isolation to avoid surveillance. Food and clothing were delivered to them secretly, along with newspapers and messages. Al-Nabhani was still able to send party instructions through these secret messages to guide them on what to do next. This isolation allowed al-Nabhani to spend a great deal of time in thought and reflection, leading him to make an announcement that would shock all of the members of Hizb ut-Tahrir. He announced that the public address of authority phase had ended. The regimes have been called out, the rulers have been advised, and the public has recognized their stances. The party was told that they are now entering the interaction phase, where the party would truly become a mass movement. The phase was defined by 3 new characteristics. The first was to begin seeking to build a popular base which can express itself and dominate public opinion. Secondly, members were expected to highlight the differences between the current system of ruling and administration with the party vision of how a state should operate by explaining the Islamic rulings regarding these matters. Thirdly, the analysis of reality was taken up by the leader, who would now respond to his analysis through organizing the party to jab at seats of power until conditions of a revolution were met. Why move into this phase now, when momentum was so slow? 97% of the members left, security is tighter than ever, and communication is difficult due to al-Nabhani's isolation. So why? Well, it's because those very rulers and regimes were responsible for the masses of members leaving the party. That if the core members now show heart and courage, they show intellectual resistance to the authoritarian puppets that want to drown the population in propaganda, that this would naturally lead to members returning and even new members being recruited. And most importantly, it would lead to them achieving the public opinion of entire regimes instead of the Muslim masses, which wasn't the case with their strategy before. However, this call to courage and activism was met with plain faces. Many remaining members believed the party was static and that al-Nabhani could not do much in his isolation. And one of the biggest realizations for al-Nabhani when met with this mediocrity was that it wasn't entirely their fault. He was the one responsible for it. You see, since the inception of the party, there was a constant stream of publications. There were pamphlets issued to the people. There were books written for their members. There were speeches written for parliamentary members and khatibs. A great deal of literature was being produced here. And all of this literature was being written primarily by one individual, which was Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani. In other words, the party membership had developed an over-reliance on one man to do all of the intellectual work. Al-Nabhani's dominating personality had unintentionally pacified the activity level of the general members of the party, and by this point, the consequences of it were glaring back at him. However, al-Nabhani felt that establishing the Caliphate is within reach, and that he can do it all without completely relying on the members to pick up their slack. So he decided to write even more. But this time, he published it under the name of the senior members. Books such as Naqd al-Ishtiraqiyya al-Marqziyya written by Ghanim Abdu, and the book Ahkam al-Bayyinat written by Ahmed al-Daur. According to multiple internal sources, al-Nabhani wrote them all. One of the reasons was to meet the objective of building the credibility of other prominent figures in the party, and another reason may have been to avoid using al-Nabhani's name for legal or security reasons. Now, there are 2 points to note over here. Number 1 is the sheer magnitude of al-Nabhani's knowledge. It is baffling how much volume and breadth al-Nabhani is able to output over here. Beyond these books and the pamphlets that were the guiding course of the party, he was writing regular political commentaries, lengthier books for the party to understand his decisions and vision, and even writing the defense for many of the arrested members who would present it in court. Yeah, that's right, he was an acting lawyer thanks to his experience as a judge in his past. The second thing to note over here is the effect that it had on the membership. They had people capable of producing original works, such as Ghanem Abdu, and they were even encouraged to do so, but they still didn't produce any original works. This indicates that members were either complacent or intimidated by al-Nabhani's genius, and this further reinforced dependency on al-Nabhani. And as al-Nabhani was slowly able to come out of hiding, the party began increasing their activity as well. Further arrests and obstacles had led al-Nabhani to review his strategy, and he resorted to a strategy known as Talab al-Nusra, where the Ummah isn't used as a mode of generating public opinion. Rather, the people in power are now to be contacted directly. Previously, the people of power were pressured via the public opinion generated by the members. It was reliant on consistent interaction with the Muslim masses to develop their thinking. This time, they're going for the people in power directly. After some active members spread throughout Egypt, Turkey, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and many other countries, building bases from which they can seek Nusra, the one country that had quickly responded to this plan was Iraq. Now previously, this had been the most terrifying country for Hizb ut-Tahrir members due to the Ba'athist party that had tortured the ex-Hizb ut-Tahrir member Abdul Aziz al-Badri to death in 1958. And a few years later, they found the Hizb ut-Tahrir leader of Iraq, Abdul Ghani al-Mallah, and decided to capture him, proceeding to torture him until he was killed as well. Abdul Ghani became the first official martyr or shaheed of the party in 1963. It was an absolute bloodbath for anyone that dared to speak up about Islam in the Ba'athist party. The Ba'athist regime of Iraq had no boundaries to their malice, but to no surprise, this bloodthirsty regime used fear to stay in power, which, if you understand history, never sustains itself in human civilization. The Ba'athist party was toppled by Abdus Salam Arif in November of 1963, and for the first time became a pro-Nasser regime controlling Iraq. This loosened the grip that was suffocating Hizb ut-Tahrir members of Iraq that could only operate underground, and all of a sudden 50 to 200 members in nearly every city of Iraq were showing themselves openly, which goes to show how much of the membership base that left did so under governmental pressure. As activity was growing, al-Nabhani was still finding it difficult to gain enough public opinion to organize a coup d'etat. By 1966, al-Nabhani released some of his frustrations by stating, "This party is a party of pamphlets, and in society it has no weight, without a doubt." When it came to all the international advancements and redirection of the future of the Arab lands, Hizb ut-Tahrir had absolutely no say in it whatsoever. The following year was yet another devastating blow for the Muslims and Arab nationalists alike, as the Arab alliance lost to Israel in a crushing defeat. Egypt lost its entire air force on the first day and lost Sinai, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank by the 6th day. The war was over with a humiliating defeat for Nasser and Hussein. The public opinion that once roared Nasser's name throughout the streets of the Arab world went silent. Hussein, the king of Jordan, was actually happy. The threat to his chair was never Israel, who he had good relations with. It was the rising Arabism sentiment that wanted to do away with the Hashemite monarchy, and Hizb ut-Tahrir did not hold back in calling out Hussein on this by distributing even more pamphlets. The support riled up as Hussein's betrayal was being made clear, and a following pamphlet that exposed Hussein's meeting in 26 November 1967 with British Foreign Secretary George Brown, where Hussein agreed to give up Jerusalem in order to internationalize it whilst gaining British backing. This was labeled by Hizb ut-Tahrir and many others the most despicable crimes done in history by the traitor. No surprise, distributors of this pamphlets were immediately arrested. However, public opinion for the party was on a quick rise, as it had been accurately predicting events leading to the 1967 for well over a year, including the loss of Jerusalem. But this prediction of events did not last forever. One slip would change the history of Hizb ut-Tahrir forever. In August of 1968, al-Nabhani announced in a document that the party succeeded in gaining Nusra and support. Elites in the army were won over. Elites in the army were won over in Iraq shortly after the 17th July coup that installed Ba'athists back in power. So it was game on in Iraq. Simultaneously, Hizb ut-Tahrir member al-Faqir won over officers in Jordan that were ready to undertake an attempt at a coup d'etat to remove Hussein from power. What seemed like an option that was far from viable quickly became a primary candidate for the Islamic State, even more so than Iraq, which was already prepared for a coup. Jordan neighbored Iraq and Syria, so an alliance was entirely likely as well to stabilize it after establishment. It was a golden opportunity like no other. The members across the world were riled up. This was the moment they have all been working for. This will bring an end to the dystopian era in which the Muslim Ummah suffered like never before in history. Everything was organized to the T to execute this coup d'etat swiftly and safely. Senior Hizb ut-Tahrir members al-Tamimi and Ameen Shinnar were on standby with radios, ready to announce to the entire population when the coup became successful. The tension was rising. The leading officers of the coup, Colonel Atallah Ghasib and First Lieutenant Abdul Hadi Falah, were both ready as well, with Falah already in Hussein's palace on the night of the event set for 25th December 1968. Al-Nabhani and Al-Daur were staying in Amman awaiting the news. And just as everything was about to unfold, the unexpected happened. Abdul Hadi Falah had a change of heart last second. He entered the chambers and stood before the king, confessing his betrayal and giving up the name of others that were involved in the coup. Nobody expected it. Falah showed an unquestionable sincerity prior to this. The exact details of what was going through his mind remain a mystery to this day. A total of 80 arrests of officers followed the first round of interrogations, and al-Nabhani and al-Daur that were awaiting the news of the coup's success instead were contacted with news that the flat owner was arrested. They quickly escaped, but al-Daur stayed to turn himself in order to save the flat owner from torture. Many were given 15-year sentences, and some even death sentences, such as senior HT members al-Daur, Abdul Qadim Zalloum, and Ibrahim. But with al-Nabhani on the loose, they knew this was far from over. Life in the Jordanian prisons were not as bad as the members had expected. Public pressure postponed the executions of the senior members of Hizb ut-Tahrir, and much of the army and prisoners had a great deal of respect and empathy for everyone who was involved in the coup. It was only the First Lieutenant Abdul Hadi Falah that sold out after all. Many of the army and officers still wanted to see King Hussein be removed. They were all too familiar with the power struggles for material gain, and to see someone do it for the sake of Allah was commendable. Seeing al-Daur whipped severely every single day without breaking in interrogations increased their respect for him. They all loved his personality that was easygoing, and his Islamic knowledge was something they all benefited from as well, since he graduated Al-Azhar around the same time as al-Nabhani. But when asked about al-Nabhani, al-Daur and the other senior members all admitted they had considered themselves in ground zero and al-Nabhani's level was somewhere in the skies. This is not just in intellectualism according to them. It was in every aspect, from the personal and spiritual to the intellectual and political. His patience in relation to food, prayer, and thought was unique even to scholars. Mind you, all this was coming from al-Daur, someone senior to al-Nabhani and arguably the most loved member of the party in all of Jordan, known for his constant sacrifice and going in and out of jail numerous times to stand up for the truth. Prison was thriving with Islamic knowledge and deep discussions as the senior members awaited their executions. However, public pressure kept delaying these death penalties. King Hussein ended up earning the wrath of many from his own population and even more from the Palestinians, forcing him into armed combat with many Palestinian factions that wanted him dethroned. He walked a fine line. It was in this moment the wives and mothers of the imprisoned party members came together and pleaded the king for them to be excused, stating that this will all accomplish nothing with the leadership still out there at large. This plea succeeded and many other prisoners were granted amnesty, and soon after their release, they were about to go at it once again. Many of these ex-prisoners thought they would have been dead by now. So coming out alive due to seemingly miraculous conditions, they didn't care to cling to life at the expense of freedom anymore. The party sent an open letter to the king stating that the public supports Islam over the British-backed Hashemite monarchy and that Jordanian society was ready to create an Islamic state. This was a confident open letter that directly challenged the king again, with its final point stating that his days are numbered. This was because the plan for a second coup was already in place, despite the first one failing less than a year ago. This just goes to show the deep support Hizb ut-Tahrir had amongst the army and population that were ready for a second go at it. But the central officer responsible for the arrangement was mysteriously arrested before even beginning the process of carrying out the coup. There is speculation on how information may have been leaked, but nothing more was known by the government other than some hearsay of some possible coup. Now, when al-Nabhani heard of his arrest, he said, "I saw the sun turn black," showing how severe this was for him. He invested so much hope and confidence in this second attempt and expected it to succeed, leaving him to lead it as a caliph long enough to make it firmly established. But it did not continue as planned. After tighter clampdowns on both the army and Hizb ut-Tahrir, there was little to no room for further activity in Jordan. This country would continue to descend into chaos by the early 1970s. By the end of 1970s, Jordanian and Palestinian forces fought each other a lot and also fought against Nasser's troops from Egypt and Syria. But Israel's presence was suffocating everyone in the region, so they held a summit to shake hands and deal with Israel first. But Nasser died, leaving Sadat Anwar on the throne of Egypt. So this entire alliance was foiled. By 1971, the conflicts between Arabs resumed as if nothing had happened, and Hizb ut-Tahrir could do very little about it. They sent a delegation to speak with the military leaders, but even that amounted to nothing, leading Hizb ut-Tahrir to label them all insincere or incapable, despite their well-received hospitality. When all doors to political change seemed shut, al-Nabhani came up with the craziest idea to date. A pair from Hizb ut-Tahrir, Ali Ismadi and Dr. Abdul Qadir, were sent to fly over to Egypt from Beirut. Al-Nabhani planned everything for them to do, step by step, down to which hotel to book, when to check out, which type of car to rent, what clothes to wear, and this led to the pair from Hizb ut-Tahrir getting by both the presidential palace and the parliament without being stopped or asked any questions. They were driving a black Mercedes with high-quality suits after all. Who's gonna stop them? At the front gates, they were met with Sadat Anwar's secretary, who asked for the reason of coming. They explained that they were from Hizb ut-Tahrir and wanted to meet with Sadat Anwar, but the secretary insisted that he was too busy and that he would try to make an appointment if they left their whereabouts. Not knowing any better, the pair fell for the trap and they gave their hotel booking over. Later that night, the secret police stormed their hotel room and took both of them into custody, interrogating them about their intentions and plans. Even under pressure, they gave up very little of it, but they said they had concerns that Sadat was a US agent. The interrogators laughed, saying that it would have been more plausible to accuse him of being a USSR agent due to the importation of Russian weapons into Egypt. The pair from Hizb ut-Tahrir insisted that their analysis was correct, regardless of where the weapons came from. And a year later, Sadat expelled Russian military advisors from Egypt, and a year after that, his stream of communications with the US in the 1973 Arab-Israeli War became known publicly. These two random Hizb ut-Tahrir members were able to learn or analyze everything that was happening behind the curtains to the T, but the pair was deported with no significant change. However, this was not an end to their presence. A Hizb ut-Tahrir member by the name of Muhammad Abdul Qawi that had previously spent time with Sayyid Qutb in prison was already in Egypt under the instructions of al-Nabhani. He was able to receive the support of one of the most influential Muslim preachers of their era by the name of Abdul Hamid Kishk. His outspokenness of the corruption of Arab leaders made him a fan favorite, but further progress between them was halted with the arrest and deportation of Abu Muhammad. Despite the shortcomings in Egypt and Syria, the party's main focus always seemed to be Iraq, their second country of choice after Jordan. In 1972, al-Nabhani gathered senior members in Lebanon, informing them that Iraq had reached the stage to have the Islamic State established there, and that the next trip will be the final one. This was it. They were to go all in, no stone left unturned. Everyone was given instructions to take radios and sit in different areas of the Arab world for effective communication, and also to manufacture a giant wave of public opinion after the success of the coup. Al-Nabhani decided that he himself would travel to Iraq, showing how dedicated he was to his analysis. And as the members were awaiting his announcement on the radio, they found it silent. Days had passed and no word was uttered on the radio. They knew something terrible had happened. It just so happened to be the case that an intermediary Hizb ut-Tahrir member carrying messages between Iraq and Lebanon was caught with al-Nabhani's letter during a routine search. The messenger was taken for interrogation, where he quickly buckled and gave up information about al-Nabhani and where he was staying. The authorities found al-Nabhani in the address given and took him into custody for interrogation along with his fake Lebanese passport. Al-Nabhani admitted to writing the letter but insisted he was not al-Nabhani. Rather, he was the name on the passport, and that he was only a scribe for al-Nabhani. The Lebanese embassy sent a letter of confirmation that the passport was indeed real as well. But it was still extremely valuable for the Iraqi authorities to have the scribe of the infamous Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani in their prisons. They wanted to squeeze any and every ounce of information out of him. So for the next 3 months, al-Nabhani would be brutally tortured in prison, given barely anything to eat, amounting to a spoonful of food a day. The torture techniques utilized by the Ba'athist Iraqi regime often resulted in death of the victim, as we heard earlier, with the body of Abdul Aziz al-Badri being found cut all over, fingers gone and tongue cut off with broken bones and teeth. The torture of Abdul Ghani al-Mullah that ended up killing him in a similar fashion as well. And yet, despite such harsh torture, al-Nabhani would stick to his story that he was not al-Nabhani, just an innocent scribe. After being convinced of the story, authorities decided to release and deport him to Lebanon. The broken and depraved al-Nabhani that had been standing at death's door in those lone prison walls day after day, week after week, month after month, was now back in Lebanon where his family resided. The plane landed late at night, and the first thing he did was head to senior member Abdul Qadim Zalloum's house, expecting Zalloum to be there. But nobody responded to the door. In that dark, cold night, al-Nabhani huddled up at the steps in front of the doorway for hours upon hours, until the time for Salat al-Fajr had come. That's when the door creaked open and Abdul Qadim Zalloum looked down to see the barely recognizable Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani lying there. The once sturdy and powerful frame lay sickly and brittle, visible signs of torture scattered throughout the frail body. Peering from behind Zalloum was al-Nabhani's son Ibrahim, shocked to see his father in such a state, but at the same time joyous that he actually returned. Everybody in Hizb ut-Tahrir was awaiting the news of al-Nabhani's death. Once you are found to be a senior member of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Iraq, death is essentially guaranteed. But to be the founder of Hizb ut-Tahrir itself was a different story altogether. Yet, as everyone believed he was gone for good, he returned, and the party reunited under his command. Al-Nabhani would never be able to recover his health to his former self, but he recovered enough to stand on his own and begin leading the party once again. Al-Nabhani returned stronger than ever in his determination. He should have been tortured to death in those prisons in all likelihood, just like many members before him. But his escape convinced him that he had been saved by Allah to achieve his goal, so he returned directly to writing once again. He released 2 books, Nadharat Siyasiyya li Hizb ut-Tahrir in January 1973 and Tafkir in March 1973. Many internal issues caused stagnation of the party's political moves until 1976, where al-Nabhani once again began organizing in Iraq a band of officers in order to take power. But stagnated moves from the officers led to their transfer away from the capital, thwarting al-Nabhani's plans once again. By the end of 1976, al-Nabhani became frustrated with the lack of improvisation of the members to the dynamic political atmosphere that was constantly changing. He reminisced about all the failed opportunities due to slow execution by the members, and wrote a short book called Sura'at al-Badiha, or Quick Intuition. Members found the quality of this short book to be weaker than the previous ones, as illnesses were encroaching on al-Nabhani's ability to write and think. Al-Nabhani also felt the shortness of his life, as he informed members what to do after his death in order to settle debts. In the 15th of November 1967, there was a re-evaluation done of the party since its inception. Al-Nabhani had concluded he focused too much on mobilization instead of developing the political literacy and capability of the members by guiding them into positions of societal responsibility. Instead, he taught them political analysis only to have most of them either arrested or ostracized from society, where they could not see the dynamics of what they learned play out before their eyes. It now had become priority for him to build actual politicians within the party that were capable of public political commentaries. A conversion of a group that remained as intellectuals, now becoming practical politicians, capable of leading the masses. By this point, al-Nabhani was bedridden, and a few months into his illness, he had to be rushed to the hospital, in which he checked out under his real name, showing recognition that his end was coming near. He had his family and close companions at his bedside as he was phasing in and out of consciousness, reciting Qur'ans between the small moments of awareness. He passed away on the 11th of December in 1977. The letter announcing his death was sent throughout the Muslim world, with senior and junior members all receiving the news. Some had broken into tears at the news, whilst others held their stature firm, paying their respects to the central leader and intellectual of the party. There was a particular shock at the senior members, who were convinced that no other personality like al-Nabhani had existed in their generation, and surely the Islamic State would be established by the likes of him. But to their surprise, that was not the case. Security concerns didn't allow for the janazah of Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani to be public, meaning only a handful, around 20, prayed janazah over him. According to ex-Hizb ut-Tahrir member al-Khayyat, all Arab and Islamic newspapers across the region were prohibited from writing condolences for him due to his reputation. Al-Khayyat still managed to get one newspaper to do so due to internal connections. Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani was not a figure saved of criticism, with many books written against him and his ideas during his lifetime. Despite all of this, no one can argue that al-Nabhani was not one of the foremost Islamic political thinkers of the 20th century. His accuracy in analysis and predictions can rarely be compared. According to the author of the book detailing the story of Hizb ut-Tahrir, Reza Pankhurst, his writing across disciplines such as fiqh, usul al-fiqh, political analysis, and philosophy are arguably unparalleled in his position as an Islamic scholar and politician, responsible for founding and developing and leading Hizb ut-Tahrir. According to Turki Abdul Majid as-Samani, who did a doctoral research on al-Nabhani's political and intellectual history, stated that he was a political thinker of the first order of this era, who produced a complete political system, referring to his Ijtihad of classical Islamic sources to draw a detailed blueprint of how a caliphate would operate in the modern era. And just over 25 years after those humble beginnings, trying to legitimize the political party in Jordan under the name of Hizb ut-Tahrir, the journey of Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani had come to an end. Congratulations, you made it to the end. I want to take a moment to thank you for watching to the end. I know it was a super long video, and this does take a lot of time to make as well, especially the scripting. If this video was valuable and you benefited from it, do share it with friends and family. If you want to support my work, the best thing you can do is like and subscribe. Maybe even leave a comment. All of that will help the algorithm push it even more. And all of this only takes you a few seconds, but helps the channel a lot. Now, if you want to support me beyond that, I do have my PayPal linked below. I'm pretty much working a wage job year-round, and I'm also a full-time university student, so I barely have time to make these videos. And the more financial help I can get, the more time I can free up from my work and other things to post higher quality videos more frequently. If you're into script writing, storytelling, filmmaking, reading books, and researching topics, I have a Patreon where I teach all of those things, and I even show a bit of my personal life, which I adamantly refuse to share on my public platforms. I generally like to keep my life to myself, but I trust my friends and supporters enough to share a bit of it that's actually beneficial to them. I also have Q&As on that Patreon where I can record lengthy answers to questions that I really can't do anywhere else. Also, if you liked this video, you can watch a similar one about the story of the Muslim Brotherhood and its founder, Sheikh Hassan al-Banna rahimahullah. Just click this video right here.